Hi everyone, happy Sunday and welcome back. I hope this week off, quote unquote, gave everyone some time to kind of rest up and recuperate, get over these illnesses that have been going around. I am so glad that I lightened the workload because I really did not have any access to internet um, except very sporadically while I was gone, so it would have made it impossible to communicate and participate in discussion boards. I kind of learned my lesson last year going to these conferences that assigning a lot of work in classes during that time is just not a good idea. So I hope everyone's refreshed and ready to get going on pretty much the last half of our class. We are going into week 8, and this week we're going to be discussing global health in the aspect of environmental health. So let me get my clicker going here. So environmental health is put in place to understand the conditions environmentally that contribute to our disease so that we can prevent these diseases. And in environmental health, we do examine all aspects of our physical environment, where we live, where we work, where we play, and all the contributing factors within that environment. For instance, the way that our buildings are built, the materials that are used, where our food comes from and what we eat, our source and quality of drinking water, our air quality, commute times and routes. It can also identify risk factors for chronic diseases such as asthma and diabetes, and even certain cancers you'll find are more prevalent in particular environments. For instance, asbestos causes, we know that that it contains a cancer-causing agent in it. So that is one of those examples in which materials used to build our buildings can contribute to a cancer. And we do know for a fact that environment has a serious impact on our health. So other things that you may not give a lot of thought to when you think about environmental health are things like geography, geology, and climate. So there are many health risks that can be tied to the local climate, vegetation, and animals that are present in particular climates, weather patterns and temperature, altitude, geographical formations, such as volcanoes, soil types, and other factors. For instance, at our elevation, and we are at a fairly high elevation at about 2,500 feet in Boise, we do have an increased exposure to ultraviolet rays. You know, some place like Denver obviously even has a higher exposure to that because they are higher, they're at a greater elevation from sea level. And then there's environmental factors like dust and wind, insects. Thankfully, insects are not one that we have to worry about in our particular geographical region, but in those malaria-prone countries, insects are a huge factor. And even in sub-Saharan Africa, you've got the things such as dust and wind that are going to significantly contribute towards disease. So looking at the home environment, I'd like everyone to just kind of take a look around at your environment, where you're at right now. Think about the things that have been used to build your house. So looking at asbestos, electrical wiring, lead paint, poor insulation, lack of window screens. These are things that some of us kind of take for granted. You know, the fact that we're living in a building with good electric wiring, and we have insulation, we have a roof over our head, we have window screens to keep out insects. But there are some people, many people globally, and even some people nationally that don't even have access to housing. They don't even have access to shelter. So they're living in cardboard boxes or hastily built shanties that they may have been able to find scrap lumber that contains asbestos or lead paint wood to build these shanties. So they don't even have the luxury of these worries that we have because they simply just don't even have adequate shelter. So something important to consider. Drinking water. This is one that I think so many of us take for granted. I know I sure do. We turn on the faucet and water comes out. Do we even think about where it's coming from, how it's been treated, what's been added to it? I have well water where I'm at, and I live right on the river, and you would think that that would give us access to just this wonderfully clean, healthy, lovely tasting water, and it really doesn't. There's so many minerals and so much iron in my water that I have to use a water conditioning process to really make it drinkable and keep certain items in my household from being ruined. Again, a luxury that many people don't have. We have access to clean running water, and most of us do. So when we think about water access, we have to think about the quality of the water, the quantity of water. Is there enough to go around? Proximity. Do we have to walk to get our water? Reliability. Are we relying on wells that may not be deep enough and may go dry according to climate? And then the cost of water. I would love to know if any of us know where most of our water in Boise comes from. I happen to know only because my mom worked for the Geological Survey. Sanitation, another huge thing that we take for granted, because I would venture to say that most of us enjoy the luxury of having indoor plumbing. In many developing countries, the disposal of human excreta, so urine and feces, is not indoor. It may not even be enclosed. They may be having to do this in the open. So this poses risks for wild animals. You know, if you're having to go out into the wild to urinate or defecate, there are certainly geographical areas in which wild animals are a concern. Also, in the sense that this can contaminate the soil, the water, and poses a huge risk of disease for having direct contact with human feces. So it's just a plethora of bacterial, viral, and parasitic infections that can occur. And this is one of those things that I see as a very basic human right, the ability to urinate and defecate in a safe and private manner. And I would love to know what you guys think. Obviously, these are questions, rhetorical questions, but I'd really like you to give some thought to them, because so many of them are things that we take for granted in our life of luxury. So then we have fuel and indoor air quality, and many of us in Idaho have either wood-burning stoves, pellet stoves, fireplaces of some kind. We need that energy to cook, to boil water for safe consumption, provide heat when it's cold, and a source of light at night. More than 20% of the world's population does not have electricity, and they use solid fuels such as coal or wood to heat and cook. So this in itself can create the release of air pollutants. All fuels release air pollutants. And some of these solid fuels are used where there is poor ventilation. Perhaps they're in one of those substandard living quarters where they have either a fireplace or a fire pit inside the home for heat and cooking. So of course there's going to be poor ventilation, and with that comes the inhalation of unhealthy chemicals. Lack of electricity also poses a risk for proper refrigeration, resulting in food spoilage and therefore illness. So I know I take for granted, I'm looking at my pellet stove right now and looking at the chimney that releases those harmful air pollutants out of my home. And I'm looking at my refrigerator and I've got it pretty darn good. I can buy food for the week and put it in my refrigerator and not have to worry about it spoiling. So the fact that we have electricity and ready access to it, fairly inexpensive, again, a luxury that many can't afford, and or that they simply don't have access to. Has anyone in class ever had to go without electricity for an extended period of time? We may think about that for a discussion question. Kind of still thinking on that. It's early yet, and the travel kind of wore me out, so I will think on that. Work environment. Obviously, all jobs pose some sort of risk, whether it's biological, chemical, physical, mechanical, or physiological. Think about your own job. What kind of risks are you exposed to in your line of work? And then we have toxins. Toxicology is the study of the harmful effects of chemicals and other environmental hazards like radiation have on living things. So as far as we've come, hazardous substances are still estimated to cause more than 400,000 deaths a year, including 100,000 occupational deaths just from asbestos and 70,000 poisoning deaths due to agricultural pesticides. This seems extraordinarily high to me. And a huge reason for this is that even though many of these toxic agents have been outlawed in the United States, they're still using them in developing countries. And then, of course, we have the air pollution that is caused by car exhaust, power plants that use fossil fuels, and forest fires. And those of us who live in the Treasure Valley of Idaho, and probably anywhere in the Northwest or Southwest even, are subject to the toxins released from forest fires. We live in a little bowl, so we get those inversions, and when we have fires, or even in the winter, car exhaust is trapped within the valley, and as I drive in the morning, I can actually see that layer of crud kind of laying over the valley. So while this is a beautiful place to live, our air quality is not the best here. So hopefully this gives you some food for thought this week. Environmental health, I think, is one of those subjects that we don't really think about in terms of global health, and probably because we do have it so good in the United States. We have access to clean water. We have good sanitation practices. We've outlawed a lot of these toxins, but thinking about it in a global aspect, there are so many out there in developing countries that don't have access to these things, or are living in substandard conditions where they don't have access to clean water or even safe sanitation. So hopefully that kind of gives you some ideas. I will be posting 2 audios this week because we do have another assignment due, which I will get into more in that other audio. But I will catch you on that one, and have a good week, everyone. Talk to you soon.